Hello, I'm Mike Dell, and today we're going to show you how to install, if you need to, and configure Blueberry PowerPress, and specifically with Blueberry hosting, but I'll also show you what to do if you're not hosting on Blueberry and hosting somewhere else. So we're going to start right here with a blank WordPress site. This one happens to be bunadello.com, but it doesn't really matter what the site is as long as it's your site. And this is a WordPress.org site, meaning it's a site that's hosted anywhere other than WordPress.com. To use this on WordPress.com, you need to upgrade to their business level plan, and then you can install PowerPress by going to the WP admin menu. And then it looks very much like this. But this one happens to be hosted on A2 hosting, but could be hosted anywhere, GoDaddy, WP Engine, 100 other ones. So first thing we got to do is install PowerPress. So you go to Plugins, and you click Add New. And then over here in the search bar, you type in PowerPress. And you don't have to put the capitals in there. But the first one that comes up should be this one, PowerPress Podcasting Plugin by Blueberry. As of this recording, it's version 8.2.2, I believe. And 8.2.3 is coming out sometime today as I record this, but it'll be the same. So click Install Now. And then click Activate. And there it is. It's activated, and you'll notice there's a new menu down here. Now, if you're on PowerPress Sites, which is a site that's hosted at Blueberry, this will already have been done for you, so you don't have to do the install. So go down here to PowerPress, and when you first install it on a fresh site, you're going to get presented with this menu. If you have an existing podcast that you're moving to PowerPress, you can click this and it'll run you through the migration and all that, but we're going to assume that you're starting from scratch. So click No. And then right here, the podcast title. You must put in a podcast title if it's different than your WordPress site. Now, bunadello.com is not the name of the podcast. The name of the podcast is the Underwater Basket Weaving Podcast. Water Basket podcast. Now you can change this anytime, but this is the title. This is the title that'll show up on Apple Podcasts and everywhere else. The category. This is the Apple Podcast category. So we're going to call this Education and How To, since I'm going to be showing you how to operate PowerPress. Does your podcast contain explicit content? For this purposes, I'm going to say no, but if you're dropping F-bombs every other word or something like that, you might want to click yes. You must pick yes or no. Podcast artwork. Over here, you can upload your artwork. It must be at least 1400 by 1400 pixels, and it can be up to 3000 by 3000. But what's not listed right here is it also should be under 500 kilobits, or 1/2 of 1 megabyte in size. So if you're using Photoshop to make your image, make sure it's exactly square, and you save it at about 50% quality in JPEG at 1400, and you'll be well within the size. You might want to go a little lower in quality if you go to 3000. Don't worry, everybody's looking at that image on a 1 inch by 1 inch thing on their phone, maybe 2 inches. So the quality setting is not super important for this image anyway. So we're going to click upload the image, and I'm going to go to my webinar folder where I have my beautiful Underwater Basket Weaving podcast image that I created in Photoshop in about 3 minutes. And then I just hit continue. And let's see, how would you like to host with Blueberry? You can self-host or you can host with Blueberry. I think if I've already got a hosting plan, I think I click host with Blueberry, and then I just log into my Blueberry account right here. So this is your Blueberry.com account. So it's going to be Mike at Blueberry.com, and put in my password. And Click sign in. And it says I'm ready to go. And let's see, select your default show. Now I have 2 different shows. This one's kind of the default. This one's no longer available. But Underwater Basket Weaving is the show that I have here. And don't worry about saving this in your password manager. All right, get started by creating your first post and adding an episode. So we're going to create the first post. And we're going to call this the Underwater Basket Weaving Podcast. Podcast. Come on. Podcast Intro Episode 1. Let's spell that right. Episode 1. You can put whatever you want in there. It's not super important. Now, the show notes or blog post content. Don't overthink this, but you should put in at least a paragraph or 2. Just at least something that tells people about the episode, not the overall podcast, the episode. We'll get to the rest of the settings here after we go through this initial startup thing. All right, so now we're going to upload the file. We assume you have your file already recorded. So we're going to select the file. And right here, it's going to say upload file. So we're going to upload it. And I'm going to grab the episode 1 over here in my webinar folder and drop it right here. You can also hit select and go find it on your computer. I happen to be on a Macintosh, but this works the same on Windows, and I believe even on Unix and Linux. So hit continue, and you're going to see a green box, and you're going to see a little check mark there. That means that that file has indeed been uploaded and verified at Blueberry, and it is ready to go. And so then all you have to do is hit publish. And at this point, you are podcasting. Okay, that was easy. That was quick. That's kind of the quick version, but there's some other settings that we really should go through before you go and submit this to Apple. So we're going to go to PowerPress, and if you just click on it or click on Settings, you're going to be presented with these tabs here. And first thing I always like to do, turn on the PowerPress playlist player and then hit Save Changes. I'll show you how that works later, or you can choose not to use it, but might as well enable it. Services and stats, just make sure that since we already logged in, there's the green check mark, so you don't need to do anything there. If you already had PowerPress installed and you're just now getting it set up with Blueberry hosting or just Blueberry stats, by the way, you do not have to do this if you are not hosting with Blueberry. In fact, you can't unless you have some sort of services at Blueberry, free stats, paid stats, or hosting. But you would come here and you'd see this, click here to configure. You would click there. You would put in your Blueberry login and your Blueberry password, and you hit save. So that's how you link this up if you don't go through that getting started menu. And you can always go to the getting started menu right here. So that's another option. Website tab. This is how you are going to control what is, oops, I went to the wrong screen there. This is how you're going to control how the player is shown in the post. So we're going to call that above page content. I like to go above. Default is below. Disable is if you want to put the short code in there every time. What I do is I do above, and then if you want to put the short code in to put it somewhere else in the post, you can certainly do that, but leave it on above so in case you forget, at least the player will be there. Display player links and WordPress excerpts. If you have a theme that uses excerpts, that means, where you see the title and a little bit of the post, and then you can click read more, or you have to click into it to read it, and you want the player to show on that excerpt page, you click that, and it will. Hide player if you want, you can do that. I wouldn't, but anyway. Display player is on by default, and I assume you want to use our player, so leave that on. Media links, display play and new window link. What that is a link that underneath the player that says play a new window. You click that, it starts playing in a new little window that pops up, and then if you're listening to a podcast, you can go scroll around on the website, or you can go to a different website, and as long as that little window stays open, you're actually going to be listening to the podcast. And I always like to let people know what they're in for, so I click Include File Size and Duration. Then also we'll click this, and that lets them know how big the file is and how long the file is underneath the player. Display Player Embed Link. What that is a link that's underneath your player that allows other people to take your player and embed it, kind of like a YouTube video. You can choose to have that on or not. I'll put it on just so I can show you what that looks like when we get there. Subscribe links. The whole idea of podcasting is you want people to subscribe. That way that they always get your episodes every single time you put one out. And if they're subscribed, they'll get it. Subscribe on Google Podcasts. That's for Google Podcasts. I'll explain email in a minute. And so what I do is I like to go through and just check all of these. Even if you're not on all of those, or you're not even planning on getting on all of those, go ahead and turn those on. The subscribe by email is the only one that's just a little bit controversial, or at least people have concerns about it. And the reason they have concerns about it is if they have another email list that they're trying to get people to sign up for. And this is not that. This is not going to help you with Aweber or MailChimp or anything of the sort. It's basically going to tell you exactly, or not tell you, but it's going to make it as an option so that your listeners can subscribe by email. So when you put out an episode, they get an email. But that's all it is. It's not, you don't get the email addresses or anything. Consider this a listener app that is powered by email. I turn it on because even if I had another opt-in, I just assume they have every option possible to listen to my show. And this is especially good for, I would say, older people or non-techie people, such as for church podcasts and whatnot, where they don't necessarily know anything about listening to podcasts. So this way it'll just send them an email. Most people have an email box, and they can just click play and right there in their email and listen to your show. It's pretty cool. All right, subscribe page. It's always good to let people be able to subscribe in any which way they can, and the subscribe page is just a page you can send them to that explains how to subscribe to your podcast. And if you just click that blue link that says create a subscribe page from template, you got your subscribe page. If you happen to have built one on your own, you can just select it right here. But basically it makes a WordPress page, which I'll show you later, that you can edit everything about it except for what's inside the subscribe box. Subscribe widget. This just shows the different ways you can show the subscribe buttons if you choose to use the subscribe to the podcast widget, which I'll show you. And you can also do rounded and, like I said, classic rounded. So we got a little bit of a formatting thing there. I'll show you what that looks like after we start submitting it to these directories. And down here is a section that just explains the different short codes. If you want to move the player around in the post, you can take this short code and just paste it in the post wherever you want the player to show up. The PowerPress playlist player, we've already enabled it. It's checked down here. This checkbox right here does not stay checked, so no need to recheck that again if we've already checked it down at the bottom. Playlist, that's how you get a playlist on a page. I will show you that as well. Subscribe shortcode. On that subscribe page, this shortcode's there, and that's what generates the little box, which I'll show you. And then there's also a skip to, so you can actually do skip to and time hacks in your show notes if you want people to be able to click and go right to a particular spot in your post or in your episode. That only works with the Blueberry player and the player that comes with, that comes with PowerPress stock, whether you're hosting with us or not. And this having issues, if you publish an episode and the player doesn't show up, you can select one of these yes things and go through all of them and see which one fixes the player. But in most themes, it'll just show up, so you can just leave it at no, everything is working. Play in new Windows settings. You can change the size of that window if you want to. It's 420 by 240, which is a pretty good size for most things. And then these miscellaneous settings, the media embed options. You can replace the player with a different kind of embed. You know, I wouldn't mess with it, but you could turn that on if you want. Auto add media, I wouldn't mess with that. Disable warnings. You know, if you're getting a lot of weird warnings in the episode box, you can turn that off if you want. Go to the bottom and save changes. Yeah, a lot of stuff toward the bottom of these settings is not absolutely necessary. All right, the feeds tab. The whole idea of making a podcast is that you're making a podcast RSS feed, and this is where you kind of control some of that. And it's also one of the two places you can actually find what your feed address is. In this case, it's my domain name /feed/podcast. And that's going to be what the default podcast feed is, even for you. So right here it says, do not allow other plugins to modify podcast feeds. I always turn that on. I always turn on accelerate feed. You know, faster is better. Feed discovery. Turn that on. That helps Google Podcasts find you. I'll explain about Google Podcasts here when we get to that section. And emojis. You could put emojis in your RSS feed if you so choose. I don't see the point, so I don't generally do it. That's just me. All right, feed title. We already filled that out in the getting started, but the feed description did not get put in there. And you absolutely positively have to have something in there to get on Spotify specifically, but it's also good for other apps. And that's just a one-liner. That's what you would tell somebody in the elevator or if you were telling somebody about your podcast. So I just put that in there. Underwater basket weaving news, technology, and practices from experts in the field, if they were going to be doing underwater basket weaving. Feed landing page. I always like to leave that blank because I always leave my feed landing page to be the posts page on my WordPress site. But you could change that around if you have some special landing page you want them to land on. You put that in there, and when somebody in an app hits visit podcast website, they'll go to that page rather than your post page. But like I said, I suggest leaving it at the post page. You know, try to keep it simple. Podcast mirror feed URL. And there should be a giant flashing warning here that says, don't put anything in this box unless you know what you're doing. But we have a service called podcastmirror.com, and that's what's known as a feed caching service. You won't need that most of the time. It's kind of a feed burner replacement. So if you do use that, then you put that feed in there. But if you're not going to use Podcast Mirror, please do not put anything in that box. Now, on Apple, you'll see a thing that says Mirror URL. That is not Podcast Mirror. That is Apple's Mirror URL, and you shouldn't use that for anything either. All right, show most recent. One of the big ticket items I get in tech support is somebody goes and they starts their podcast and they get up to episode 11 and they publish episode 11. And episode 1 drops out of their feed and off their listings. That's because the site default is set to 10. If you leave that blank, you're only going to get 10 in your feed. You can do it at 300. So I just do it at 300. So leave it at 300. That way you don't have to worry about it. If you go to 301, your first episode will drop out of the feed, but it will also drop off Apple Podcasts even if you have 500 episodes, because the absolute maximum in Apple and most other directories is 300. No big deal. They're all available on your website. Feed episode maximizer. If you set that to more than 10, you need to turn that on. That makes the older episodes a little bit smaller, keeps your feed size a reasonable size, because just like the artwork, your feed shouldn't go over 0.5 megabyte if you can help it. It'll work up to about 1 megabyte, but the bigger it gets, the slower it is and less apt you're going to be to get things updated rather quickly. Copyright. Just by making content on the web or making content period in most countries, you are already copyrighted. But if you want to put a statement in there, you can put a copyright statement in there. You don't have to, totally optional. You can also, instead of a copyright, you could put a Creative Commons statement in there, which is a form of copyright. Or you could just say, public domain or whatever. You don't have to put anything in there. It doesn't really show up anywhere, but it's just in the feed so that, just in case you want to defend your copyright, you've declared your copyright. Caching debug comments. Don't check that box unless support tells you to for troubleshooting, or if you're using WP Super Cache or W3 Total Cache, and that helps a little bit with that. Okay, location. If it's important, put it in there. If it's not important, you don't have to. Again, that is 100% optional. I put that in there just because I'm pretty proud of where I live. I'm in Traverse City, Michigan, the cherry capital of the world. Episode frequency, also completely and utterly optional. I do this roughly monthly, although this has been the first one I've done in quite a while. But I do this video about monthly because we do update PowerPress on a fairly regular basis and things change. So I try to keep this as up to date as possible. Donate link. You can click this button and syndicate a donate link. That's for Patreon, PayPal, any other type of service that you want. But the trick is it only works in certain apps, and most of the apps that it does work in are not very popular. The one I can think of off the top of my head is Skipcast. All right, not very many people use Skipcast, but Skipcast has a button that says donate to the podcast, or whatever you put for donate label, buy me a coffee, buy me a beer, whatever. You can put that in there. I don't because, like I said, it only works on Skipcast, and not very many people use Skipcast, although it's a cool app. Parental rating. This is important for people that have set-top boxes in the United States specifically. We have a thing in the United States called the V-chip law. And the V-chip law states that anything that goes on a television has to have a parental rating. So pick a parental rating that applies to your podcast. If you need an explanation, there's the links right there that explain. If it's not specifically for kids, don't go any lower than G. If you cuss a little bit, maybe PG. If it's very raunchy, MA, use maybe be honest about it. But this only applies to set-top boxes. This does not apply to Apple Podcasts except for on Apple TV. Scroll to the bottom and hit Save Changes. All right. The Apple tab. Apple is the 800-pound gorilla, so you want to keep them as happy as possible. So let's do this. Let's see here. I've got it over here. So I'm going to put the same thing I put in the feed description up here in the iTunes program subtitle. And by the way, Apple changed the name of iTunes to Apple Podcasts and Apple Music on the Mac specifically. But they still have a lot of the tags that are called iTunes. So that's why you'll still see the word iTunes in here, but the software called iTunes right now only exists on Windows for the time being. Anyway, the iTunes program summary, that's just kind of a longer form of what you put in this box and in the description. The description, the subtitle, and the summary do not show up in the same place at the same time. So one app will use one app will use another app will use yet another. If you happen to have a Windows machine with iTunes on it, iTunes will use this one, or this one up here, the subtitle, and Apple Podcasts on the Mac or on the iPhone or iPad or whatever will use this one. It's kind of weird. Spotify uses the one that's over in the Feeds tab. It just depends on which app you're looking at as which one of these things will get used. All right, wrap summary values with CData tags. I leave that off. iTunes episode summary. Optimize iTunes summary from blog posts. Your blog posts already are what's going to show up for your episode descriptions anyway, so I leave that off. Category, we selected that in the getting started. You can select 2 more categories if you want to. These 2 are suggestions to the Apple team if they want to feature you manually. But you will not be in these 2 categories. You'll only be in this first one. iTunes explicit, we did check that in the getting started menu. iTunes author name. It used to be you could put something other than just a name in here, but no, now Apple wants you to just put a name in there. So Mike Dell, that's me. All right, and then it has this use blog post author's name for individual episodes. I suggest not doing that because really that isn't used very often anymore. It used to be, but it's not shown anymore, so I'd leave that off for the time being. Now, that may change in the future, but for right now, leave that off. iTunes email. This is not only used for Apple, it's used for pretty much anything that you submit your feed to. So you want it to be an email that you actually check. It does not, N-O-T, not have to be your iTunes or your Apple Podcasts, or what is it? Apple ID, I guess is what it is. It does not have to be your Apple ID. It has to be an email that you actually check. You can't be, you don't want it to be an email box that you don't check, because if Apple has anything to say to you or anybody else has anything to say to you about your feed, you want to know about it. So you definitely want a real email in there. So mike@blueberry.com. Since I get paid to check that one, I will put that one in there. iTunes type. No option selected is a perfect thing to leave it at. There is episodic, which is the default, so you can switch it to episodic, or serial. And serial, what that does, but only in Apple Podcasts, is it makes it backwards so that your newest episode is at the bottom of the feed instead of the top of the feed, which sounds appealing, except for that's not how podcasting works in most cases. So leave that at no option selected or serial, not serial, at episodic, because that's what you're going to do. You're going to do an episodic. So you want the newest episode to be the top of the feed, and then it works backwards from there. Trust me, that's how podcasting works. iTunes new feed URL. No need to click that unless you really know what you're doing. So don't do that. That's for if you're moving in from another feed and you want Apple to switch the feed for you. You don't have to go to Apple and switch it. You click here and then you put in the feed from this website, and then that tells Apple, after you do a redirect, that you've moved. But for our purposes here, starting a new podcast, don't touch that. Also, don't touch these 2 things unless you want to stop podcasting. Scroll down to the bottom and hit Save Changes. You'll get tired of me saying that, won't you? All right, the artwork tab. The getting started does a good job of getting it in the iTunes image, but it doesn't put it in the RSS image, which some apps use. So copy that image link right there and just paste it down there. Easy peasy. Go to the bottom, hit Save Changes. Okay, now that we've already got a podcast, and let's go look at that podcast post. That's what the podcast post looks like right now. And you'll notice there's the player, there's the Play a New Window link. If I click that, it starts playing up in this new little window. It's noisy, and you might want to listen to that sometime. Go to bunadello.com and check it out. But anyway, the download, so that's just a direct download of the MP3. There's the duration and the file size. It's a little short 2-minute thing that I recorded a long time ago. And there's that embed link. If I click that, it gives you a little iframe that you can embed into another website. Subscribe links. Notice right now it's only Android, email, Google Podcasts, RSS, and more. If I click more, that takes me to that subscribe page that we made. And it explains, about subscribing. It gives you all the different links here. Now I notice it came up with iHeart, Pandora, and Deezer, which we're not submitted to yet. So those won't work right away. But it explains how all of this kind of works. You can edit everything that's outside of this box. And then you edit what's inside the box by using the Destinations tab, which I'll show you in a minute. So anyway, I just wanted to show you what that More link is, that subscribe to podcast page. All right, so right now that looks rather boring. It's okay. It's a good player and everything. But we want to make it look a little nicer. Now, this is only for people that host at Blueberry. But you can go to PowerPress and go down to Audio Player, and you can select this top player. Hit Activate and Configure now. If you want, you can change the color of these buttons. And you can go down here and hit Save Changes. And now when we go back and look at the post, there's that. And notice it doesn't have the image there yet. It will. So let's go back to the back end. And also I want to show you the widget. This works for everybody, whether you host with us or not. But go to Widgets. And blog and post sidebar. In my case, I have more than one widget area. A lot of times you'll just have one. But you just drag that subscribe to podcast widget and plop it in the top there. It's got the subscribe to podcast as the title. You can change that. You can go modern or classic. You can go square or rounded. You can make vertical or horizontal. And you want it on the default podcast because that's what you're going to use. And it's already been saved. So let's go back and see what that looks like. Now you see there it's got Google Podcasts, Android, email, and RSS. So let's go back and go to the Destinations tab. So PowerPress, Settings, and Destinations. This is where you submit to all these different directories. So let's start with submitting to Apple. So you click Submit Podcast to Apple. This takes you to the page on Blueberry that explains how you do this. If you're logged into Blueberry when you do this, it'll do a few other things. It'll show you what your feed is, but if not, you copy your feed from right here. You can copy your feed address right there. So copy that. Go to Apple, or go to, what did I do here? Let's go back. All right. I don't know what I did. Hang on. That's it. There, that page. Okay, so when you click this right here, you end up on this page. And you go down a little ways and you'll see sign in to iTunes Podcast Connect. And yes, it's still called iTunes Podcast Connect, even though Apple doesn't like the term iTunes. But click on that, and that'll bring you to the sign in. So there's my Apple ID already pre-populated, and my password's already pre-populated. Hey, I like that. And it'll bring you to this sort of page. And there it goes. Now, it automatically pre-populated that. If not, there'll just be a box here with URL. You paste that in there, and you hit validate. So you hit validate. It's going to go through and validate it. And prepared for submission. And there's my artwork. There's my category. There's language. There's audio. Explicit no. Description. Copyright shows here, but like I said, doesn't show everywhere else. Website link. All that. And it shows that first episode that we published. And so it says prepared for submission. You submit it here. Apple will email you at the email address that you put in the iTunes settings, or the Apple settings here. So your iTunes email, that's where they're going to send you the email. But they'll send you an email saying that your podcast has been submitted to Apple for inclusion in the Apple Podcast directory. Okay, and then anywhere from 1 to 5 days. And yes, it can take 1 day, it can take 5. Generally not more than 5. They'll send you another email, and that other email will say, congratulations, you're going to be in the store, and here's your subscription link. You take that link, you paste it in there. You go to the bottom, and you hit Save Changes. And then when you go to look at, and I'm going to open that in a new tab so we don't have to keep doing it. You go here and look, And voila, there's the Apple Podcast link, and there's the Apple Podcast button in your subscribe widget. If we go to the subscribe page, Apple Podcasts will be on the subscribe page. And it works the same way with all the rest of these, except for the Blueberry one. Don't worry about the Blueberry one. The way you do Blueberry, since you're hosting with us, or even if you're not hosting with us, the way you do Blueberry is you copy that. You go to your Blueberry Podcaster dashboard, and if you don't have one, sign up for an account, and you can add a podcast to the directory, and then you can do it that way. But if you're hosting with us, you go down here to hosting settings, and this is very important. You want to go up here and hit publish from your own WordPress blog with PowerPress plugin. Then you paste that RSS feed right in there that you copied, and you hit save. And then you go back to Podcaster Dashboard, and now you'll see that the directory listing now has a listing settings page. You click on that, you click Save and Update Listing, and voila, it added an episode. And if we go back to there, we click View Directory Listing, and there's the directory listing for the Underwater Basket Weaving Podcast. There's our episode 1. And since this image is now here, that image is going to show up with a little bit of caching delay, so give it a couple hours, but that image will show here in the player. Whatever image is here will show up in this player. So don't panic that that's not there yet. You have to go to Blueberry and add it to Blueberry. If you're not hosting with us, you can't use this player, and you'll just be using that black player, and you don't need to worry about it. All right, so let's do the rest of these. The Blueberry listing is right here, so we'll just copy that out of the address bar, and we paste that here. That does not add a link anywhere. This is just a really good place to put it. That's all. All right, so Stitcher Podcast at Radio, you click Submit to Stitcher, and you go through their little instructions. Like I said, you click here, you get all the instructions and a link to the place to do it. And you give them your feed, fill out the form and all that. Stitcher will not send you a link. So what you have to do at Stitcher is you go to Stitcher.com and you search for your show. When you find your show, you find the show listing, and you copy that address out of the address bar up at the top of your browser, and you paste it right in there. Same thing with TuneIn.com. So we got a TuneIn link. I do have it over here in my cheat sheet, but there's my TuneIn link. Spotify, I do believe I have a Spotify link here. Yep, I do. And it works the same for all of them. So I won't go through the rest of them, but if I go, I've got all those in there. I hit Save Changes, and then I go back to the website. I refresh. You'll see that Apple Podcasts, Android Email, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, and RSS, and more. And whatever other ones you put there will show up here and in the sidebar here. So hopefully that's clear. If you have any questions, of course, you can get a hold of us at Blueberry Support. So that's the Destinations tab. And like I said, we have links to how to get on these other ones right there. And pretty self-explanatory. So that's really about it. Was I going to show you anything else? I don't think so. Basically, we're here from 9 to 5 Eastern Time. You can call that 877 number, hit extension 1, and you'll either get myself or Dave in the support team. On the weekends, you would email support at blueberry.com or go to blueberry.com/contact, put in a contact form, and our weekend crew or Dave or I will get back to you. And that's it. You just kind of wait until you're ready to go. Now, one other thing I did want to show you is how to post your next episode, because we posted it in the Getting Started, the first one. So you just go here, you go to posts, and it has to be posts, Posts, not pages. Posts. Hit add new. You fill all that out. You go down here, you click select file, you upload the file just like I showed you, and then you hit continue, hit publish, and you're done. Rinse and repeat. And Let's see. I'm kind of hoping that showed up quicker. Oh well, it'll definitely show up for you within a short time. Thanks for watching, and hopefully this helped you get acclimated with Blueberry Podcasting and PowerPress.